Thank you. So what I love about this panel, before this was trendy or before it seemed inevitable, before events like this existed, these leaders on stage today were doing it. They had the courage to do what was right for their kids. And so I thought, you know, we'll start with Dr. Miller. You mentioned, you reminded me that you're only 29 years old, but you've been in education for over 40 years.
That's right.
It's like dog year sometimes,
We're working
right?
on math, too.
That's right. Over 20 years as a superintendent. What gave you that courage?
Well, actually, number one, we didn't see it as courage. This was back in 2010, and about January is when we started. We saw it as an opportunity, and it was an opportunity that was grasped by our teachers, by our students, by our board, by our community, and there was also a communication part of that certainly we need to share out what we're doing and why we're doing it. But part of what happens is when you go home and you look at what students have in their hands, you look at what parents have in your hands, what most of you have in your hands today, in 2010, you didn't have those. It's happening that quickly. It's an opportunity. And I think Alberto Carvello shared the same thing this morning. It's not a crisis, it's an opportunity, but we have to grab the opportunity and run with it. And that was the chance for us. We did that, and we continue to do that every day as we go forward.
Great. Michael, a little bit different situation, relatively new superintendent at Salisbury Township.
Yes.
Why is this so important?
It's so important because this is such an exciting time in education. I've only been a superintendent for 5 months, but I'm blessed to be in a district. Yes, I know 5 months, a little bit less, but I'm blessed to be in a district that several years ago said, what do we want teaching and learning to look like for our students in 2014? So they put together an initiative called TL 2014, and they said, here's what we want our students to be able to do. We want them to be able to collaborate. We want them to be able to be creative. We want them to be able to really think critically and create and be involved in their own learning. And we want the same for our teachers as well. And so they then decided how they were going to do that and how they were going to get there through a one-to-one initiative at the middle school and the high school level, and then also expanding technology resources at the elementary level. And so for me, when coming into this situation, I still sort of view myself as an outsider, taking a look at this organization. For me, it's so critical because I see the high level of engagement that's taking place in the classrooms, among the teachers, among the students, in which they are creating. And for me, engagement is that time where, you know, you're firing on all cylinders, you're engaged cognitively, emotionally, and you even forget that you're learning because you're so involved. And I think the resources, the digital content, that helps us to achieve that vision.
That's great. Dr. Jackson, let me go to you at Nash-Rocky Mount. Currently rolling out what you call a digital transformation initiative. So could you talk a little bit about that and why it's so critical?
Well, I would say initially that for us it's been a moral imperative. We have a responsibility, I think, to prepare kids for a future that we can't define. And so that really does mean that we're going to have to think differently and I think embrace the urgency of the moment and take advantage of this opportunity. So our iConnect digital transformation has been about ensuring that we're focused on preparing this next generation of kids to be competitive, preparing them to have options, and preparing them not only for college and career readiness, but for life readiness. And so our initiative has really been about the equalization of access and equity for our kids and making sure that they're ready for that next step as they move to the next generation, into the next phase of their lives.
And Dr. Johns, I wanted to give you a break.
Thank you.
And so Dr. Jackson talked about we're now preparing students for a world, I think it's over 60% of students born today will have a job that doesn't exist today. You spoke a little bit about that, but how do you embed that within your school system? How do you prepare for that?
Well, one way I think about that is the class of 2025 started kindergarten this year. And if we know those youngsters are going to change jobs 5 to 10 times in their lifetime, they're going to have to create, we need to start that work early in kindergarten. So one of the reasons we started with our iPad laptop initiative, I wanted to go one-to-one, but unfortunately we weren't able to do that. So we've actually put those tools in the classroom, and then we personalized the apps and the digital content for each of those students. And as a result, as a teacher works in small groups with students, then students spend time with their individual learning plan, either on the iPad or on the laptop, where they are very much engaged. They have their headsets on. They're getting immediate feedback from that digital content. It's collecting data, rolling it up to a teacher data set where not only where parents can see it as well as the teacher, but then the teacher can use that information to then later instruct them in small group. The other thing I think that is really powerful, one part of the program we're using is we use the apps. We're not just putting apps on the computer. As I said, they're personalized, so we assess the students using the NWEA. Then we send it out to a private service provider. They actually identify the apps. Students set goals with their teacher. They then pick the apps. Then they're loaded on the computer. And then they go through the various apps. And when they go through their apps and then they do the challenge, their one final thing they have to do is do a video of themselves reteaching the concept. So they have a digital portfolio, and then the teacher can also use it to have a conversation to see if students have understanding, misunderstandings, what she needs to reteach. But it also can be used for student-led conferences. And I think that's really putting the power of learning in children's hands. And as they continue to progress through the grades, over time we'll continue to enrich that digital content so that it evolves and students are prepared to have the problem-solving skills, the creativity, and other kinds of leveraging that technology.
That's great. So one of the things that we wanted to share today was certainly why. Why is this so important? Why is this so critical? The moral imperative. What about urgency? Where's the urgency, or how do you create that sense of urgency as a district leader to anyone?
How do we create this sense of urgency?
Within your organizations?
I think it's already there. When you look at our students, they all arrive ready to do that, and they're asking why not. At the same time, you look at our teachers, and I think we kind of lose track of this, but I would suggest those that are 35 years of age and under, that's been their world for a long, long time. They're part of that digital native group. They're also asking, why not? And I would say that also we have now administrators, if you look at that same age range, that are our assistant principals and now principals. Part of the problem is people like me, over 29, that happen to be superintendents, we are the immigrants back into that. And so we're probably the ones that struggle more than the others. The urgency is there, I think, with the constituents we serve. It's there with basically our young teachers that are moving forward and saying yes. And we see this always as a tool for learning. It's about the learning, though, not about the tool. And I think we have to be really cautious when we talk about this, that it's not about the technology, it's about the learning. That is facilitated, it is enhanced, is helped by the tool that we bring forward. But the urgency is there. We just kind of have to get out of the way, I think, sometimes.
Right.
Scott, I'd like to add to that. I think the urgency is there in the sense that the schools that we have today, I mean, I have many great successes in my district, but I will tell you that when I look at our student achievement data, we have great successes for some kids. We don't have great successes for all kids. And when I look at youngsters who come to us who don't speak English, we have a lot of work to do to help those youngsters transition if they're going to be able to participate in their future. So we have a moral obligation and a commitment to those youngsters that doing school the way we have done it in the past to prepare them for a factory, that motto is outdated. We need to talk about what does the new model look like and transform education. And again, I have teachers who are doing that, but I think there has to be a greater sense of urgency because there are others who are doing it quicker than we are. And if we want to innovate, we have always been the country of innovation. We need to position our children so they can lead us into the future.
Tony, you and I talked earlier about the culture of learning. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of that in your school system?
Yeah, I was going to add to what Chris said, that it's truly important, first of all, to recognize that we're dealing with a generation of kids who they are 21st century learners, and we're still talking about preparing kids for the 21st century, and I think the last time we checked, we're 13 years in. And so the reality is we've got to retool us and recognize that there's a different learner sitting before us. And so we have seen where kids are taking the full responsibility of their learning, where they are, in fact, embracing the fact that I loved what Mary Moss, I'm going to get it right? What she said. She's a rock star, because the reality is what she said was, let me figure it out. And so when we start embracing the fact that we don't have to pour this knowledge into them, but we have to facilitate and lead them to that place where they are learning on their own, then in fact that takes a whole different, it changes the environment of the traditional classrooms. And so we're seeing that already where our focusing, even students have said to me as I walk through, because I'll sit down and talk to them, and I had a high school student look me in the eye and say, our teachers look at us differently. It's a different, we talk differently. So the conversations have changed, their approach, they own their learning. The schools are now what I like to call, innovative learning landscapes all throughout the building. There's learning happening in the halls. There's learning that's happening in places that we traditionally would tell them, shh, be quiet. And kids are now over in corners doing things. That's a cultural shift for us. We have parents who are embracing the fact that kids aren't going to be bringing home a huge book bag full of stuff. That they can now look in and see how their kids are doing. Those are major shifts that you have to make sure that you're aware of and that you're embracing and understand those dynamics as you move through. And it's made a huge difference for us in our period of time so far.
Great. And you talked about student ownership of learning. And Michael, I mean, I remember you and I having a conversation and you mentioned the same thing. What does that look like in practice?
It is so exciting to see when you go into classrooms and you have conversations with students about their learning, and they can tell you what they're doing and how it's shaping their progress within the classroom. So for us, it looks like at the primary level where we have students on iPads and they're taping themselves as they're doing their reading fluency, and then they're listening to themselves back, and then they're tracking their goals and their benchmarks with the teachers, and then being able to put together plans to say, this is how I'm going to meet that trajectory. That's one way. We have, upper elementary, where we have students who are telling me about the projects that their teachers are allowing, I shouldn't say allowing them to do, but creating the opportunity for them to do by the digital resources that they have available to them. So they're actually able to have choice and then create personal learning networks, which they are able to share, and they're Skyping after school, and they're saying, okay, what are you doing, and I need help with this, and they're helping each other and helping teachers as well with the technology. And I think that's really exciting. Our middle school, it's really gone off the charts. Our students are involved in project-based learning, and we recently had a group that they got to, again, select what challenge they wanted to take, and so they said, we want a salad bar in the cafeteria. And so they researched, they did all the legwork, they got together all the data, they collected the information, they used the tools that they have to put together a presentation for district administration and for the head cook at the middle school. And at the end, the head cook said, we're gonna give it a shot. So they're gonna try it and see if it works. So for me, that's real learning. At our high school, we have a media edge class where students create public service announcements. It's not the traditional, let me just read the announcements and we'll do it on video and say, we're technology advanced. They really are looking at the psychology behind messaging and how you get a message out using media, and that's exciting. And capstone for me was this fall, we had 8 students, regionally, the only school district in our area that participated in their own TEDx event. So those 8 students presented presentations to their peers, to colleagues, to the community about sustaining innovation. And so they did that in front, they had to prepare, they had to do that, and then it's now online for everyone to see and provide feedback. To me, all of those are examples of real world and how we operate around those networks.
That's great. So we're going to open it up to questions in the room. So if anyone has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. We have a couple coming in online as well. So I want to ask one of the questions that actually came in from Michigan, but that doesn't mean it has to go to you. What is the largest obstacle to scaling digital classrooms across the educational horizon, and how might we overcome that obstacle? Yeah,
So
Rick.
Scott, let me take a crack at that by actually backing up to your earlier question. Because you talked about urgency, and again, I think that's a misunderstood term. If you look at John Cotter's work out of Harvard, in fact, he wrote a book called Urgency, which was a sequel to an earlier one. He talks about urgency, number one, not being just activity. Sometimes that means we're all busy, and we call that urgency. That is not urgency. Urgency is a specific action. The second piece of that he talks about is timing. which is right now. It's not tomorrow, it's not next week, it's not next semester, it's right now. So I think we have to begin to think about, when you talk about scale and all those issues, let's stop talking and start doing, because we know everything we need to know to actually move forward and get it done. It's just that we have to have that collective will. Somebody earlier today talked about that. Let's just do, I think it was Representative Miller, we don't need to wait for Washington any longer. We have the capacity. Let's go do it. And I think it's that let's go do it part that we have to get over. That's a choice on our part. It's not like we have to have special permission. It's purely a choice.
What are those perceived barriers then? So if we can overcome the obstacles, what are the ones that you run into that might be perceived barriers from the different stakeholder groups?
I think the let's go do it, when I take a district, when I think of doing one school or doing one grade level, that's pretty easy. And even individual teachers who are ready, it's pretty easy. When I think about 30,000 kids, 1,500 teachers, different grade levels and all the complexities, we can do it, but also making sure the infrastructure and all those components in place. We need to have the sense of urgency. We need to go do it. We need to get it done. But we also need to also think through very strategically what are the steps that need to occur in terms of educating the community where we're headed, providing the necessary professional development for our teachers, because our kids are ready. And then also making sure that the supports are in place in our districts. And I think one of the obstacles, I think the technology can help us save dollars, but the reality is we also need to make the investment in education. And I think one of the obstacles, at least coming from the great state of Michigan, is that while schools have been funded, there has been some challenges in how they currently are funded and a lot of reductions. And I know some people may see it differently, but I know in the 7 years I've been superintendent, we have faced budget reductions, significant budget reductions. And it doesn't mean you always need more, but you got to be able to redirect. But the truth is there are some challenges to that, and I think we need to be honest about that. We need to make sure we have the resources to give to our kids.
Great. Any barriers, Tony?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we've learned is that by building the buy-in and making sure that you're educating all of those individuals, we have worked very hard to make sure that our community, our staff, our students, that everyone understands that this is a learning initiative and not about the devices. I see that as a barrier sometimes because I think people get caught up with the shiny. And as soon as the shine is gone, then they're going to ask you, well, what's next? We have to really start the conversation talking about the learning outcomes. And there's a multitude of devices, there are a multitude of resources that we can bring to bear to make it happen. But I don't want to miss what Chris said earlier about doing your homework and making sure that you have the infrastructure to support it, getting all of that stuff out of the way so that when you launch, people understand you see small successes all the way through. You have to have those quick wins as you do this, and those remove some of those thought barriers that people will bring to the table. Money is always one that people will bring up front, and I think it's important. I view budgets as a list of priorities, and then if this is important, then you have to ensure that it takes its place in the line, and some other things may have to go second.
Excellent. Rick, you had?
Well, let me challenge the notion of money, because I'm from a state that's gone through probably as worse off situation as anyone. We're about $5,000 per student. When I got there 4 years ago, we had $400 million was our annual budget. Every year I've been there, it's been less. We've cut $100 million. The bad news is we've lost $100 million. Here's the good news, and we need to focus on the good news. We have $300 million. How are we going to spend it?
That's right.
And so I think that as leaders, it's important for us to focus on what we can do versus what we can't do. And focus on, you don't need permission for a lot of what we're talking about, and yet we get caught up in that. And so we talk about the union issue. People say, well, I can't do that because of the union. Really? Because the union has defined something called a contract. Yeah, when it fits in those conditions, we have to deal with that. But I think beyond that, we have lots of latitude, and we have lots of teachers and other people that are ready to go do this. Let's go do it. And so part of this is a leadership issue for us. I think we have to step out there and say, let's go.
Great. How about questions from the room? Anyone in the room have a question? Yes, Tom. That was tentative, Tom.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you're going to be comfortable with a question, to be honest with you.
Somebody else then.
The education community now is expanding with collaboration, and they're using various media to do that. I'm noticing that I'm not seeing Twitter names up there for you guys, and I was wondering if you have blogs that you write, either on Twitter or blog, because modeling what we want our teachers to do is the best way to get teachers to do things, and I'm not seeing that kind of information on your yeah, feel free.
I'd like to speak to that, because that's exactly, you talk about the barriers that need to be overcome. One of the things that we need to do is we need to communicate, and then communicate some more. But I define the communication of not just getting the message out, but also involving the stakeholders in that message and the communication that's going out there, so that it becomes a process of information coming back and forth. I have a personal Twitter account. I have a Twitter account as the superintendent of the school district. We have a Facebook account that we try, again, to get the information out. The good news, the quick shots, saying, hey, look at what's happening inside your schools. We're breaking down those walls and inviting the community in through that media to see the great things that are happening. We're getting our student work posted online for them, for parents and the community at large to see and to engage in. And then most importantly, we just, as a school district, we just launched a platform called SalisburySD.us, where we took that exact question and we said, if we're expecting this of our students, then we need to be doing this as leaders. So myself, my business administrator, the assistant superintendent, instructional practices supervisor, we've all started blogging. We have community members who have now started to offer up our articles for us that we blog. We have students who are posting and putting information on that, talking about their learning. And we tackle issues straight on. We don't filter something. We say, look, if you have an issue or concern, you put it out there, and that will engage us all in that dialogue. So I have a card. I'll give you my Twitter account.
How do we get every superintendent in the country to feel that same way?
Well, I think that's that barrier, and it's that shift. And for many traditional, I think about what Mary Moss said, well, it worked for me, why isn't it working for you? Well, it doesn't work for you. There's this concept that networking is not working. And I think networking is really working, and it is professional development, and it is about learning. So when you have things like Twitter, when you have things like Facebook or blogs, you really are working, and not just about selling a message, but again, engaging people into that. So I think it's overcoming that barrier and sort of that fear and that question. I was just thinking of a poster that a colleague had in his office of, it said, not we can't, but what if? And I think that's what we need to be asking, what if we have pursued this?
But through Tony and then, Rick, go ahead.
So let me kind of take a shot at your second part of the question. And I've been blogging and been social media ever since I've been in this district. The reality of how do we engage other districts and superintendents, it is a modeling issue. But what happens is, and I think the blogging and all that's too narrow, even social media is too narrow. The real issue is communication and messaging, and how do we create an engagement and a dialogue with our community. As we do that, I can tell you that my colleagues around us are saying, whoa, we've got to change our game. We have to communicate differently. And if you wait for the newspaper to arrive to do an article about whatever you're doing, you're out of the game. We have to communicate in a way that meets the customers that we have out there. How do they want to engage with us? Obviously, that's social media. Obviously, that's video/YouTube kinds of things. And so we engage in all those. And recently, one of my superintendent friends said to me, Rick, we're doing this, this, and this, and the reason is because you're putting so much pressure on us. Our kids are going to you because we're not reacting. And so I think that there's, again, a viral nature of this, that as we get out and actually do it, our colleagues will jump into the game. They're all smart people. They want to do well. They're committed to kids. And so we just have to grow together. And we have to share information about, what are you doing? What am I doing? What's been successful? What would you not do again?
Correct.
Those kinds of things.
Okay. Tony?
I can't add to that. I tweet. I have I have Facebook, MySpace, your space, all of them. And I want you to understand that, I say to my principals that social media is truly that new leg of the stool that if we're not engaged, we miss a huge opportunity. Because before, you could talk to your community, your PTA, and if one person didn't like it, they'd raise up at a meeting and call you out. But now you can have a PTA member who lives across the country who can engage the conversation about what's going on in your district based on how well you communicate. So I think we have to think that that's one of those shifts that I think we have to embrace and understand. But I think it's important to recognize that it has to fit that community, it has to fit that structure in terms of how you're getting that message out. So we have it all, Facebook page, all of that kind of stuff. You can go to our district website and click on it.
Excellent. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, over here.
Thank you, and I really appreciate all the insight that the panelists have shared. It's been really great for me. And my question is, as a member of higher education, I represent the United States Naval Academy. When you talk about stakeholders and getting others engaged, do you have any insight or best practices on how folks in higher education can be a part of the solution?
I think there needs to be open lines of communication, and there needs to be that dialogue that is happening between you know, K to 12 and higher ed. In my former position as an assistant superintendent, I served on a task force with a community college that looked at the transition from high school to community college and what could we do to ease that transition and really sort of support each other in both ways. And I think, again, it becomes about the dialogue. And I think also that higher ed needs to come in and see what's happening in K-12 classrooms. As much as we often talk about K-12 going and seeing what's happening in higher ed, I think the reverse needs to happen as well. I had a student who, as part of one of my advisory councils, who told me he was really happy that we did the one-to-one initiative because the first term that he had the laptop, he went into digital distraction. So he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, and he was playing games and doing all those types of things, which we hear as an argument sometimes as to why we shouldn't do this. So everybody sort of had that implementation dip, but then he realized, wow, if I don't do this, my grades are going to suffer, and I'm not going to do well. And he went on a college visit, and he said, you know what, Mr. Roth, I sat in that classroom, and I was watching all those students sitting there, and they were all on their devices like we are, and so on and so forth, and nobody was paying attention to the professor. And they were doing other things. He said, I saw them doing all these other things. And he said, I've learned, thanks to what you've done for us, that I have that self-discipline now. So I know when I need to engage and how I can engage using it and so forth, but I also know when I need to not.
Something
the best I can share with you is a brief anecdote. We have one of the University of California campuses in our district. We did a community presentation and we videotaped it, which is our typical issue, and we archived that in our YouTube version that's out there. The chancellor of the UC campus came to me and said, Rick, I need that video. The reason is, he says, I need to take that to all my department chairs, all the people that I can have influence over, and they need to look at the video. And the rationale is they need to know who the students are that are going to come and sit in their school. And if they don't respond to that, the fact is those students won't sit in that UC campus school. They'll go someplace else.
I would also say, as we built buy-in, the institutions of higher education were at the table in terms of the conversations that were held, as well as our chamber, as well as the community groups. You can't do it. They can't come along later. I think that's the huge mistake. I think we have to have the conversation and be willing to have a conversation that we've not had before about practice.
Right. Christine?
Well, I think I agree that we need to have the conversations, but I also think we need to also think about what are the partnerships and the actions we can take together. And we have multiple partnerships with University of Michigan Flint, the Macomb Community College, Oakland University, MSU, Wayne State, and others. And it's everything from helping us train teachers that are coming in, because I would agree many of the teachers coming in have knowledge of how to use the digital devices and the content, et cetera. But the truth is that if they're trained in a traditional model, they then tend to go back to traditional practices. So we have to deepen those conversations and really expedite that, because I've been around long enough now that we've been having those conversations. We need to talk about the actions. The other, the partnerships with the university, as I agree with my colleagues, it's about getting them into the schools so that they can see who our kids are. Because our youngsters are really learning at pretty deep levels. And the truth of the matter is when they go to college, sometimes if they're a really progressive school, they move forward, but if they're not, kids then make other choices or they adapt to it. And if we really want to sustain this in the way we envision it, they have to be at the table and in the conversations and deepen it.
You've referenced professional development twice, so there's a question from a teacher in Thailand who says, what would be your advice related to technology to a brand new teacher about to start work in their first school?
Network, connect. That's what you need to do. You need to be, you need to be able to say, I don't know and I need help with something, or not to feel that you need to be the expert in all things. That's what I've seen happen in terms of how we scaled out our professional development. We did it in a way where we sort of did train the trainer, and we brought groups together who got trained, and then they went out and trained. And now we have our students, part of, we call them digital aces at the middle school, and they're going and learning technology, and they're learning the tools and so forth to not only help their peers, but also to help the teachers. And the teachers will tell me, well, they've been asked the question, well, what if you're working on iMovie and something doesn't work? What do? I ask a student, and the student will come up and will help them. And I think, so that it's reaching out, it's connecting, and it's not being afraid to ask those questions.
Great. Any other advice, Tony?
I would go a different direction, because I would say also let them know that they may be looked upon as experts before they're ready. As a new teacher who comes in with a lot of these skills already intact, that some of the more veteran teachers may be looking to them to help bridge that gap. So I would say be prepared. You won't have as long a time to be a rookie as maybe we had when we entered the field.
Great.
Let me give you a different spin. I think the role of teachers is shifting, and so you need to be thoughtful about that. And you're one of the learners in the classroom. How do you access that peer learning between students and facilitate, leverage that, enhance that, accelerate that? And I think as teaching goes forward as a profession, that's going to be a critical skill, yet that's not one we've really discussed much as we've come to this point.
How do you, there's another question that I think is related to this one, which is, how do you make it so that teachers don't feel threatened by this?
You have to create a culture in which risks are acceptable, and that failure is okay as long as you have a plan to overcome that failure. Or what's going to be the plan as a result of, and what did you learn as a result of that? So I think you have to create that culture where you're saying, we're going to be here to support you, and we want you to take those calculated risks because that will open things up.
Christy?
I would agree. We need to give people permission to take those risks. Interestingly enough, in the state of Michigan, we started to deploy our kindergarten initiative. The state passed state law that says you will have a teacher evaluation in place immediately. And in fairness to our teachers, I mean, they were willing to do the work, but it does have, there's a reality. You're going to evaluate me, and you're going to ask me to do all these new things. And I had to share with those kindergarten teachers is that it's okay to take risk. And in fact, you're already here because you're outstanding teachers. And as long as you continue to learn, and you're going to make some mistakes, but you analyze it, you reflect on it, you adjust, then it's going to be okay. And you have to set that kind of context and culture to make it work. And I would agree with you.
Excellent. Any other questions from the audience? How about another question from the folks in person? Over there. Jason.
Curious to get your thoughts on the digital transition as it relates to assessment. One person I'm thinking about is Heidi Hayes-Jacobs, who talks about it's great that we're putting apps in front of students and that they're using them and consuming, but she also suggests that really we should have students designing and creating their own apps. So I'd love to hear what you see as the possibilities in this digital transition for assessment.
Well, I was at the Khan Academy on Tuesday, since we're flying from coast to coast. I think the reality is that we have the expertise now to embed that. And yes, students ought to be engaged with that. There's other Silicon Valley entrepreneurs that are building that into literature. So as you read, there's actually assessment that's going on. And assessment's kind of a bad word in a sense. People get all excited about it, but it's learning. because you're stopping, you're reflecting on what have I done to this point, what have I gotten out of it, what have I learned, and based on that, what are the adaptations we need to make in the learning process to move it forward. So I think we are absolutely there already. Again, the question is, how can we embrace and bring that into our conversation? And I guess relating back to the earlier question, yes, we need to give permission and all those kinds of things to teachers, but the other part is we need to always, always, always focus on the learning. If it's the learning and not the compliance to a particular tool, strategy, whatever, I think we're fine. When we start to get back to the compliance issues, that's where we get it wrong. We've been an input system. We have to transform ourselves to being an output system, output meaning learning. And I didn't say test, I said learning.
So let's ask the question. I mean, the question that's commonly asked, if you focus on the learning, is there a disconnect between that and the way that we're typically assessed? Or can they go hand in hand?
Well, I think they can go hand in hand, but overall, my mantra is NCLB testing in our state, any state, is minimalist. And if we only did that, we have totally missed the boat. We have to really have a much broader view, and that's our discussion inside of our district. How do we get to what we call the value-added pieces? Value-added that are demonstrated when you're involved with JROTC, value-added when you're a part of the mock trial team, value-added when you go to the science fair, history day, etc. Band, I mean, there's all kinds of things that get left out of a narrow NCLB. We'll take a math test, we'll take a reading test, both of which are critically important. You know, those are baseline things that have to be done. But it's much broader than that, and again, we are responsible to do something about that. We can't wait for that to be legislated by somebody else.
Right. Tony, where does assessment, authentic assessment, performance tasks, where does that fit into your overall strategy?
Well, obviously it has to be a part of the strategy, and I'm sitting here listening and really trying to ensure that we're making sure that it's embedded in the learning part of the structure and not an add-on and not something that we think about afterwards. I think it has to be an ongoing part of the work and not something that we just create for the sake of saying we're going to create something so they can do it in this particular environment. It really has to be ongoing. And I just believe that with digital content, you have more options in terms of how we assess. We were talking about the whole creation piece. We were talking about it doesn't have to be that formal, this is how we do it all the time. It can be multiple ways and in multiple formats.
The other notion I think we need to think of in a structural way is we need to be moving to student-centric. Mm-hmm. So when you move to student-centric, assessment takes a whole different view. And when you look at the Stanford MOOC as an example, people say, well, they drop out early. I was talking to one of those dropouts recently. John says, I went this far and I left because I didn't need the next section. He had learned what he needed to learn to the level that he needed to learn it. The other thing that happens is at the end of those courses, they're looking for certificates, not a diploma from Stanford, because the credentialing has changed. All that is representative of being student-centric. And again, I think we have to begin to embrace that concept and say, what does that mean in my school and in my classroom?
Any other questions in the room? I have another one from online. If not, I'll go ahead and ask mine. If you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll get you a mic. Here's an interesting one. We've all talked about different approaches, different strategies to this digital transition. Is there a model that you're following? How are you going about laying this out? Tony, you're shaking your head.
Well, we're blessed in North Carolina, I think, to have the Friday Center. And a tremendous amount of resources available to us in terms of guiding us through being very strategic about our transition in terms of making sure that we've done our homework. We agreed at the very beginning that you only get to lay a foundation of a house once. You can go back and renovate everything else, but we rarely renovate the foundation. So you better do that right first. So do your homework, know what you're doing. The second piece of this is ensuring that you have the appropriate buy-in and that you have the community support of the work. Be sure that you've invested appropriately in professional development and that your people are prepared before the students are thrown in front of them, that you really take the time to do that, that you take the time to be very strategic and deliberate about the resources that you're going to use, and that every app is not a good app for the instructional environment, that you have to be very intentional about what you put in front of students. And then most importantly, have an opportunity for, or a well-defined structure to assess. Not to assess the students, but to assess the quality of the transition, the quality of the implementation, so that you can have a cycle of continuous improvement. And all of that, I think, ties in well. But I would say I strongly recommend the tools that are available at the Friday Center for you to really roll out and use at your disposal in your districts. They've been tremendous for us as we've customized our plan for our own district.
Excellent. Christine, I see you shaking your head. Was there a roadmap?
Yeah, I don't think there's a cookbook, here's how you do it. I think you have to take the context of your district, understand your community. I would agree with Anthony, the Friday Center, and also through Project 24, which is another group that's focusing on moving the digital agenda, learning agenda forward. They also have a framework and have questions that you can use. It's really, if there is a model, I think there are some school districts at different levels that are doing great things. We heard from Mark earlier and some of the other school districts here. I think there's elements, but I do think you have to look at your context and have conversations with your teachers and your staff, so there is that buy-in and people are learning along the way. At the same time, you have to accelerate that learning.
Yeah, a question here.
Former superintendent, and now working with Pace University. And I wanted to ask what you think the implications of this conversation and what's happening now, what the implications are for educational leadership programs.
Great question.
At the higher ed level.
It's a good question.
I guess you go from that idea, the model really needs to change. So it's not necessarily about just you learn how to do the operational piece of running a school or being a leader. I mean, that was sort of, that's been stressed. And there's been long and lots of dialogue about leadership and so forth. But I think it really requires you to dive down as to why you're involved. And I think that's why you want to get involved in leadership. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do is to really get people to investigate themselves before maybe they make that leap into leadership. So they understand the challenges that are out there, but also, as was said earlier, the opportunities. So if you really have that core value and that core vision and are open to that, then let's take the next step, because I believe that's what you're truly going to need.
Yeah, if I could, the technology is an important piece, absolutely, but just as important is really an understanding of how you deal with opposition, how you deal with conflict, because many superintendents don't blog and they don't get into this model because there is a sense of uncertainty that we're always trying to close down. And this is about opening up uncertainty. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Christina.
Yeah, I think this really piggybacks on the other question that was asked earlier that I chose not to respond to, because I was actually thinking about some of those political realities. I'm not really afraid of those political realities, but the reality is that there has to be time in the schedule to do it, and you have to be able to practice it. Well, practicing in real life, you can take risk, but there's also lots of other things depending on the size of your district you might be managing. And I personally believe while we have blogs and we do all those things, I mean, I work through my staff to do that. In order for that to get better, I have to be able to do it. And I firmly believe in the modeling, and I'm working on it. I really am, because that's how you learn and that's how you model for the organization. But I think in the educational leadership programs, that's a safe space for people to learn as they network with their colleagues and you push them out. And that's really where we need to start. And we need, again, give people permission to do it, but also teach them how. I mean, you can say just jump on, and I know we're talking about kids who jump on, but some of us are in transition too, and I'm not afraid to say that because I'm a learner. But at the same time, there's reality of I got to be able to do my job from the day to day. So that's how we help them.
Rick and then Tony.
I think that in training programs for quite a while now, we've been having the conversation about management versus leadership, but that's been about what it's been, a conversation.
Right.
And the focus has been back kind of at the site levels, if you will. It's been all around the management, the things that we get fired for. You know, you got to take care of this and this and this and this. The reality, though, is that if you don't have leadership, you don't actually get things done. And leadership is how do you take people and get them excited and motivated and incentivized to go do something. That's leadership. And so I think the conversation back at the university level has to start to be, okay, how are we going to be leaders? And oh, by the way, that has nothing to do with position. So you can be a leader and be a teacher. You can be a leader and be assistant principal. And Maxwell even talks about the 360-degree leader. You can lead up as well as leading down and leading sideways. And so I think we've got to have more practice at the leadership part and less practice at the management part as we go forward.
Great. Tony?
I would add, leadership matters. And I think if you look at all of those, the districts that have been successful, they've had good leaders in those schools. And I think Mark referenced Todd here in his leadership at Mooresville. But I would also add, it's what I said earlier, look at our preparation programs. And we've not done a lot of shifting other than now the digital piece is creating a digital portfolio. When we're talking about the influence of social media on the work of the principal, how much time are they spending just managing and understanding that part of the work? There's very little work that's happening in the preparation programs to give them a context for which to operate. And because I think they have to understand that they have to, I think, lead in this particular context when there are times when without a Twitter account, as a superintendent, I've learned that, it's not true unless it's on Twitter. And so sometimes you just have to put it out there on Twitter so that you can get the message out a lot faster, because realistically, instead of me sending 1,000, they'll retweet it 1,000 times. But also you have to understand that each individual principal, each individual system has to recognize clearly that this is a new paradigm for us in our work, understanding that social media is a very huge part of the work, and that's the part that I see absent in the preparation programs. Just how to, in fact, use it effectively. And if I had to make a recommendation, I would say that's where we need to focus right now.
With the social media, though, I think it's important, at least a concept we've worked with, is we don't want to just be involved in social media. It's about habituation. We've got to get our audience to habituate around our website, around our blog, around our tweet, or whatever the piece is, or otherwise we're wasting an incredible amount of time because we're sporadically sending things out, but they don't have enough habituation there to keep coming back. And as we've developed that, we've seen a real spike in our followership that takes place. So I think we need to link those together in terms of social media. There's got to have that piece with it.
Great. All right, last question. Mike Lawrence from California has a question.
Yes, I was thinking about it because Dr. Miller mentioned assessment as learning. And it made me think about the new adaptive assessments that are coming through from Smarter Balanced and Park in connection with the Common Core standards. And I'm wondering, how are you feeling about that? Are you anxious about it? Are you optimistic about it? Where do you see, from your perspective in your districts, those new adaptive assessments playing a role?
We're anxiously excited about it. We have, obviously it's new for everyone, but I think we have the opportunity, I think, to shift the way students are, in fact, demonstrating what they know. I see it as a tremendous opportunity, not as this heavy burden and wow. I believe kids can do it and will do it. I think it will provide a better opportunity for students to demonstrate the knowledge that they have acquired. So we're excited about it in our district.
Dr. Johns?
We're piloting the Smarter Balance assessments in our district right now in 10 schools. And I feel the same way you do, Anthony, that we're excited about it and it's an opportunity. There's also some challenges with the test, with what we're seeing in the pilot. And I think the issue is not about what the test score is going to be, but what we're doing with learning. And as we looked at some of the assessments right now, the pilot doesn't include adaptive assessments. We're integrating those adaptive content into our curriculum already, so our kids will be ready. I think the challenge is how do we, when we move into that testing environment, if kids are working with digital media all the time and they're creating, when they take the test, there's time constraints on them. So we have to teach them that time management. So there's some structural things we need to address, but I am optimistic that with the performance assessments and the task, it focuses on learning, not just on what the test score would be. The tragedy would be is if we just focus on the test score, even though we need to monitor performance, the idea is our kids coming up with the kinds of skills we want them to in terms of they're able to demonstrate they know the knowledge in some other kind of way, not just the bottom line of here's the final test score.
All right. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists today, our visionary panel. It is my pleasure to now announce that lunch is served. So for those folks online, it's time to eat. For the folks here in person, outside the doors, please, and you're welcome to come back in here. There's some areas outside and also outside in the real world. So thank you very much.